Welcome back, everybody, to So Your Parents Are Old. I'm Vanessa Grigoriadis. Today, we are talking with Amara Walker. She's a journalist, a longtime CNN anchor, and someone who has spent her career telling the stories of others with clarity and grace. She's on the board of the Alzheimer's Association. She's doing a bit of a pivot, professional-wise, and off camera, she is a daughter who is navigating some of the same very complex terrain that so many of us are right now, caring for her aging mom, her legacy, trying to be present for those she loves. So welcome, Amara.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for touching on this really important topic that so many of us are going through, being a part of the sandwich generation.
I know. How old are your kids?
Mine are 5 and 7, but my journey began right when my 7-year-old was born, and that's when I started seeing the signs, but the denial went on for many, many years.
Many years. How many is many?
Well, my mom and I were super close, right? And I would call her multiple times a day, and we would have all kinds of conversations, ranging from the trivial to profound. But when you're not living with the person and you don't see them day to day, it's hard to catch on to some of the things that, she might be forgetting, or let's say her hygiene. I wasn't there every day to see that perhaps she wasn't brushing her teeth or forgetting to brush her teeth or wash her face or changing out of her daily clothes. And I think my dad noticed it much earlier on. I just don't think he had the heart to talk about it, but also he likely was going through the denial as well. But my daughter was born in 2018, and I mean, the signs were so obvious, Vanessa. My mom would say things like, "Oh my gosh, this girl is so cute. Where's her mother?" I mean, that was obvious.
Okay.
But I just would say, "Oh, Mom, this is your grandchild, your granddaughter, your first granddaughter." And then I think earlier on in the stages of dementia, they try to compensate for it and maybe try to act like, it wasn't a big deal, or they had a quick lapse in memory. And so because she would try to cover for it, I would believe her, or at least I would tell myself to believe her, because I didn't want to face the reality that potentially she might have Alzheimer's.
I mean, I think it's so interesting because your culture, Korean culture, you have written about how in some ways you were an unemotional family, and I also had a very similar experience with my mom, who has dementia and is quite ill, in terms of how do we talk about these things? Because we spend a lot of time together, but we don't really talk about the emotions. We don't really talk about the hard things. In my family, a lot of that was compensated with humor, How was it in your family?
It's brought my family closer. I come from a family, a very traditional Korean family, where we didn't talk about our feelings as much. But we have been more and more, and we've cried together several times, my dad and I, but I can count it on one hand. But that's the only time we've ever cried together, was over my mother and the diagnosis and her progression. So it's definitely brought us closer together, but it does still feel a little awkward, because this is not how I grew up, talking about our emotions and crying on each other's shoulders, except for my mom and I. She and I had a very close relationship where we did talk about, all the uncomfortable things that you should with your loved ones.
Yeah, so you grew up in California with
I did.
them, and
Yeah.
then you came to Atlanta, I assume, for media, for CNN.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so were you part of the Korean community in California, or where exactly? And tell me
Yeah.
about
So
upbringing.
I grew up in a little town called La Palma, which is not far, let's say, from Disneyland. A few 15 minutes from the beach. Yes, I grew up in a Korean community, a heavy Korean American community. My mother was involved in the Korean American church. She was a pastor there, a minister.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this is what, this was my identity growing up. But there's also it's funny because the way I grew up was I would come home and I was fully Korean. We sat on the floor. Koreans sit on the floor when they eat, with this beautiful mother of pearl table, tiny little table. And we had a Korean meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Lunch, of course, at school, my parents would sometimes pack me Korean food, but at that age, I was always embarrassed. Korean food wasn't a thing back then, neither was K-pop. So I was always embarrassed of my heritage, which makes me feel guilty. But you pick up on the cultures and the traditions, and there's a lot of stigma associated with Alzheimer's, as I'm sure you've experienced, and culturally too. There's a lot of saving face and not being so open about your struggles in life. And for me to talk about it openly as a public figure and as a journalist, who you're trained not to show emotions and to be impartial. But I think it's totally fine to be who you are and to be authentic in your life experiences. And that was hard for me to grapple with, was the stigma of Alzheimer's and what my father continues to deal with, even within our own family, really. And when I say own family, I mean extended family, my cousins and aunts and uncles, not my nuclear family. My mom, my dad, my brother, and I were very close.
Yeah, it is a really interesting disease in that way, in terms of how freaked out other people are by it, right?
Did you have a hard time?
Still here.
Yeah, the person, and people don't know how to deal with the person, right?
Right. They don't know how to deal with it, and they're fearful of talking to this person that isn't the person that they remember, right? I mean, I think I've said this before on this podcast, but I had an experience where a friend of my mom's said, I saw your mom on the street the other day, with her aide, and it wasn't her. She wasn't there. That wasn't her. And I was like, I am her daughter. I'm here running into you on this very street, very obviously going to see my mother, Think about who you're talking to for a second. Like, the correct way to say that is, I saw your mom the other day. She looked great. How are you doing? Right?
That's right.
And it's very difficult. I mean, it's been for me a big wake-up call about the importance of the family, right? And not so much the friends, because I don't know if your experience at all is that, maybe there's church ladies who are still coming to see her, but friends, people that she was friends with for 40, 50 years, I've not seen them recently.
That's the same experience for me as well. My mother's, but I give them grace, because they did call my mom up until, she lost her phone and never had a phone again. And they tried to connect with her, but she didn't know who they were. Right. I'm sorry, who is this? And I don't know you. And then my mom stopped answering her phone. She stopped knowing how to even use the phone correctly, right? I'm just curious about your experience, Vanessa, and I don't mean to turn the tables, but, because it's a very isolating disease. And one thing that was very disheartening for me was the friendship circle. I understand, right? Because how do you maintain a friendship if they don't know who you are anymore? But what about extended family members? I mean, do they continue to come around? How do they deal with it?
I don't have any family close. So they're all very, very far away. So her sister does still call her. There are a couple of people who said, oh, I will for sure come and see her, who did not, right? Who just haven't. I think, unfortunately, her generation is quite sick or dying off or dead, right? So they haven't been as in touch. But also my mom was like an urbane artist. Her friends were really, in some ways, her close kin. So that's been the part that's the most surprising. But I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that extended family has also sort of, forgotten how to get in touch, because it's hard to have a conversation with somebody who's not saying much on the other line, right? But you have to sort of think of it as something you don't want to do that you have to do anyway, because it's a responsibility.
It absolutely is. And I don't know, where is your mother in the disease, if you don't mind me asking?
She's like middle
She's middle.
stages. So she does know who I am and who my kids are. I had one experience where I had come over to her apartment and she was in the bedroom and she was coming back out and she saw me and she said, "Who is that? Who is that person?" And I was like, "It's me," and she said, "Oh, okay." And there have been like a few things like that, but she does know, but she's physically incredibly affected. Like her body is just not working. She's in a
Really?
wheelchair. So, I mean, I think that there may be a vascular dementia a diagnosis there as well, right? A mini strokes kind of thing that led to one side being very weak. So it's not, I mean, as you know, this is just a catch-all phrase. Dementia, Alzheimer's, these things are just catch-all phrases. They're no different than autism. They're just a way of saying these are, neurologically horrible
Neurodegenerative.
diseases.
Right.
Like, whatever's
Absolutely.
going to happen, it's horrible. And I mean, I've had people say to me, "But is it Alzheimer's or is it a different dementia?" And I'm like, "Well, let me just tell you something. The other dementias are worse." So
Yeah.
you actually should be like pleased with the Alzheimer's versus the Lewy body. Although, I mean,
Correct.
that's sort of a crazy thing to even say. But for me, it's been a very lonely experience, and I also live in the same city as my mom. So I'm curious for you, how has it been being so far away? And do you wake up in the middle of the night going, "Oh my God, I need to move to California," or how do you deal with this
That's such a good
psychologically?
question. I wanted to ask you if you found it more difficult being near
I
her,
don't know. I think they're
Because
both bad.
right, there are pros and cons to both. I mean, I would say so the time when I would wake up in the middle of the night, that is actually accurate, Vanessa. I would wake up just sobbing for my mom because in the beginning when I started seeing the signs and I started to come around and after the official diagnosis and she was still kind of in the middle stages, I had longed to be next to her and to just be with her through every stage because I saw her friendship circle fading and even her own siblings stop, coming around. And I said, well, all you have now is me, my brother, and my dad. There's an element of it's easier to be so far away because I can use the excuse, and I'm being totally honest now. I mean, every time I go to California, which is about 3 to 4 times a year, I dread seeing my mom, as horrible as it sounds. And let's say I arrive on a Friday, I have had trips where it would take me 3 days until Monday till I would have the courage
Yeah.
to go and see my mother. She's bedridden right now, Vanessa, and there was a whole series of issues that triggered this, and some of it I wish I could have made different decisions about her medication that landed her in the hospital, and I think that's what made her forget how to walk because my mother was very physical and very healthy despite the brain disease. It's made it easier, but at the same time, I'm constantly filled with guilt. My father, who's in his 80s, who is just the most sacrificial, most committed, dedicated husband and father and family man, I feel guilty that my 80-some-year-old father is driving 30 minutes, excuse me, every other day to go see my mom, and she's just laying there. She doesn't recognize him. So it's easier in the sense that I don't have to face the hardship of seeing her just laying there. But of course, it's also difficult because I'm constantly thinking about, well, what happens when I get the call?
Every decision is gut-wrenching. And what do you feel that people need to know about this? I mean, being on the board of the Alzheimer's Association, I feel I was sort of blindsided by it. It sounds like you maybe were a bit too,
I was,
because
absolutely.
your mom was far along before there was acknowledgement. Like, what do you feel people need to know?
There are resources out there, and please use them. I, as a journalist, by nature was a resourceful person. And as my family was going through this, they leaned on me to find the information because this is what I do, right? And I would Google and search and call people, and it was easy to get people to pick up my calls, and they were always willing to help. And I was still confused about where to turn and how to do this. And for instance, caregiving. I mean, just to find caregivers, with my mother's Alzheimer's, her English, she worked at a high school for 15, 20 years. She lost her language, her second language being English. She completely lost those skills, and she reverted back to her native tongue of Korean. And
wow, that's so interesting.
And sorry, my audio. There we go. Apologies.
I'll just say, let me just say that again. Wow, that's so interesting.
She and I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought.
The Korean.
I'm sorry.
She was speaking Korean and
the caregivers.
English. Yeah.
So my mother lost her ability to speak English, and she was only speaking Korean. And I knew to find her a caregiver, I had to find people who spoke Korean. My husband is German. My mother would see my husband and speak Korean to him and didn't understand why he didn't understand. So just finding caregivers was incredibly difficult. And the whole getting Medicaid was a whole nother layer of difficulty and challenges. This is before we had any financial help. It was me and my brother paying for everything. And I went through the church. I called the church. There are a lot of mega Korean churches where my parents live, which is a blessing, right? Because there is a community that could support my mother. I found a nonprofit that took my mom once a week. It was like an adult daycare. But once her Alzheimer's progressed to being quite aggressive, they had to ask us to leave, which is very much understandable, especially for the safety of the other, people who were attending. So I went through churches. The Alzheimer's Association connected me to people in the community and other nonprofits. So I think what I wish I could have done differently was I wish I could have asked more questions and asked more people for help. My nature, just in general, maybe because my parents are immigrants from Korea and my father always said, keep your head down, never ask for help, never take anything from the government, just do your work and be successful and be self-reliant. And it wasn't in me. Do you get that?
That's my family. Yeah. To a T. Yes.
Right? And it was so difficult to ask for help because I just, maybe it was a pride thing, which there's no reason to feel prideful about that, especially with Alzheimer's and navigating it. I mean, I'm here to help. I'm sure anyone who reaches out to you, you're always willing to help. And there are resources out there. There are communities. There are support groups that I was sending my father to. The layer of the difficult layer was the Korean language, right? And my father was also more comfortable in Korean, finding a support group for him in that way. And then the decision to put my mother in a home.
Yeah,
that
tell
was
me more
traumatic.
about that. How did you come to that? You said she had an operation that didn't go well, or
it wasn't an operation. Well, no, we'll rewind just a little bit, if we will. My father was in his late 70s, and I mean, he was bathing my mother and feeding her every single meal. He was getting physically tired, and every time I'd visit, it was difficult to see my dad doing this. And in my mind, I was worried of losing him as well, right? And I had moments where I got really nervous because my mother was getting aggressive. I wasn't sure what she might do. She would recognize my father sometimes and wouldn't. What if in the middle of the night she does something or turns on the stove and has no idea? And my father's hard of hearing. And so there was a safety aspect to it, but also I had to choose between my mother or father. Who can I support to thrive, not just survive? Right. And that was my father, right? So we had a lot of talks with my dad, my brother and I. And my dad was very much against the idea because in our culture, you bring in, you keep your loved one with you till the very end. You don't ever put them in a home. And I found an assisted living facility, which turned out to be pretty awful. But we put my mother there. And back to your question about the emotions and coming from a more stoic family, I will never forget when my dad had to move my mother into this assisted living home. I offered to fly out. and he was willing to take it. And then, of course, there's wait lists. And the moment that it arose for her to move in, I was in Europe on a vacation with my children and my husband. So my dad said, listen, I'm going to do it now. Don't worry about me. I'm going to move mom in. He did it with my brother. And I knew in my heart this was going to be difficult. They had been married for 50 years. Oh, yeah. So I remember, when was it? 2 weeks after I'm sorry. It was 2 weeks after my trip. I called my dad. And I said, Dad, how's your heart? How are you doing now that mom has moved out? And my father, who was like so stoic, was walking through an outdoor mall, and he just started sobbing on FaceTime, and I was like, oh my goodness, he's so broken, Of course he was, he just said goodbye and dropped off his wife of 50 some years into an assisted living home. So of course he felt extremely guilty, right? And of course I did, because I forced my father's hand.
But was it the right thing?
Absolutely. I look back now, this was 3 years ago. And oh my gosh, my father, is he thriving? I mean, he's more than surviving. I'll say that, I feel like he's gotten a couple more years in his life now, because he doesn't have the physical labor of taking care of my mother and forcing a shower on her and, making 3 meals a day and changing her and driving her to all of her doctor's appointments, right? Mm-hmm. So it was very difficult. It was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done, out of my own volition, but it was absolutely the right decision.
And why was this place awful? What was it about it?
My brother and I, we put enough money together, and even that, we found a very decent assisted living facility, and they weren't really trained in dealing with the type of Alzheimer's my mother had, right? And the aggression. And so we would show up to visit my mother, and she was mobile. She was walking around and talking to people. They would keep her in a room and not allow her to walk through the halls because she would scream and stuff. So she got a lot of solitary confinement from my perspective, which was heartbreaking to see. And this aggressive form of dementia, it's also hard to medicate, right? Because they give a lot of psychotropic drugs, have a lot of side effects. And, this is not a mental illness, it's a brain disease, and you're not really treating the problem. And this is why, the Alzheimer's Association is so amazing, because they put a lot of funding into research, and also research turns into treatment, right? And medications. So, yeah, I mean, the assisted living facility was not good, but we ended up putting my mother in a nursing home, because, funny enough, not funny, but there, about a year into my mother being at this assisted living facility, the FDA approved a new drug that treated aggression in patients with Alzheimer's.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of doing psychotropic, we went to this drug, and my mother's GP said, this looks like a great drug for her. Would you like to transition her? And I said, sure, if you recommend it, let's do it. And of course, the black box warning is there's a small percentage of people who can have a deadly reaction to the drug. And that was my mother.
Oh my God.
And she got really sick, and she was transferred to a hospital. She was hospitalized into a skilled nursing facility, and she recovered physically from that drug or the adverse effects of it, but she never recovered from that. I believe, my assessment is that she forgot how to walk, right? Because she was hospitalized for weeks.
So she had delirium in the hospital.
Correct.
And then, what was this drug?
I have to look up the name of the drug. I can get that for you, but it was one of the few FDA-approved drugs that treated aggressive behavior in Alzheimer's patients. I heard great things about it. Just my mother had, the adverse reaction to it that most don't have.
Oh my God! So
yeah.
How did you find the nursing home? Did you just go there straight from the hospital?
Yeah, exactly. So she was transferred from the hospital to this nursing home, and my brother actually had volunteered there and worked there in high school, and he had fond memories of it, and I researched it and read about this nursing home, and it got great reviews, and people had really nice things to say about the care that their loved ones received. And so we're pretty happy with how they've been treating my mother and taking good care of her, and the nurses have been wonderful. So
So what
that's where
are
she
your
is.
tips? I mean, because this is something I think about a lot, obviously. Like,
Yeah.
what are your tips for finding a nursing home? And does she have Korean speaking
No,
care there? Or, yeah.
that was important to me in the beginning, Vanessa, and she did at the assisted living facility because my mother was speaking with people. Right now, she doesn't really talk; she kind of babbles, and so I just want nurses who know how to take care of a patient with Alzheimer's and
Right.
who are
Or
compassionate,
kind. Yeah.
kind. Yes, and so this is what we have. Um, you know, being the journalist that I am, I ended up talking to the families. When they would walk out, I would kind of pull them aside and how do you like this place? How do you feel like is your loved one getting the treatment that you believe they deserve?
Oh, smart. Yeah.
So this is how I ended up staying at this nursing home. Some some of these nursing homes have a memory care facility where they're well trained in dealing with all kinds of dementia, because as you know, it manifests in very different ways, right? My mother is aggressive, others are big lovers and happy and revert to just being cute little children. Just depends on the disease. Ask a lot of questions, and if they get annoyed or refuse to answer or don't get back to you, then that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Ask them, what do you do if the patient gets aggressive? Oh, well, we redirect. We have a program where we have a music program. Well, we help redirect and give them more peace and calm. We have a Zen room for them. We also have a specific diet, that's more anti-inflammatory. We do brain games. We do lots of physical activities to get them up. We get them outside because the sun is very important for their emotional and mental well-being. When you hear those kinds of things, those are the things you want to hear, because you know that they're thinking about the quality of life for this patient and not just, filling a bed space.
Yeah, that's all really smart. I mean, it's so hard to even think of that stage. I mean, so you mentioned that it's difficult for you when you get to California. I mean, what tips have you found to cope with somebody not being there but still here? I mean, sort of the thing that people said to me on the street, which we know is the truth. It was just a rude thing to say, right?
Really?
But we know that's the truth. I mean, what are your tips for coping other than like deep breathing?
There's a lot of deep breathing before I go in, and some prayers and trying to stay calm. A couple things. Number one, I love on my mom so much. She just lays there, and how much physical touch is she getting as she's just laying there talking to herself? And so I'll lay on top of her and put my cheek on her cheek and rub her face and, rub her head and hold her hand and rub her. I just rub her entire body. I go look at her feet and I massage her feet, just because I know this is not what she's getting on a regular basis, right? And she responds really well to it. What she responds really well to is music. So I'll sing to my mom in her ear. My mother loved music. I mean, she got opera singing lessons. She tried to play every musical instrument that she saw. She loved the piano. She loved playing guitar. My house was filled with music growing up and her voice. So the last time I was there a few months ago, I leaned in, I held my mom's face, and I started singing some Christian hymns to her that she loved in Korean. Well, as much as I could sing it in Korean. And I started repeating it. And she would smile. She loved it. I mean, she didn't know what was going on, but she smiles and she kind of looks at me, but doesn't. But the fact that she's reacting and has that reaction, and she looks so happy, it really soothed my soul. And so these visits in the last few months have been amazing, because I go in telling myself I'm just going to love on her, and I'm just going to make her feel loved and cherished and like a human being. She's not forgotten, and she absolutely responds to it. It's amazing. What we humans, we we crave and cherish connection, right?
Right.
And the best way to connect with my mother is through touch because everything else is kind of gone.
But that's what the real tragedy is of this disease, right? Is that these people just want to connect, and
That's
it's so
right.
hard to find other people to connect with them. I mean, it's so complicated, and none of the answers are really the right answers. Sometimes it's really just like one of those things that's like a mind-boggling logic problem. How do you feel we can address this better as a country going forward? You know, you hear things about like Scandinavian country has a whole town that's their assisted living place, and it's all just made for people with dementia who can go around and have an ice cream and sing over here, and everything is just a fantasy land that's welcoming and positive, which is what they need to be around.
There's also a cafe, I believe it's in Japan, where they employ um, elderly people with dementia. And so, of course, the consumers who come, the clients who come, I mean, they're very understanding. Sometimes they'll show up with the wrong order.
Yeah,
And so, yeah,
very
it's
funny.
about integrating them into society. You know, I think we have a long way to come, right? I mean, you can talk about that from your experience. I mean, people don't, even though Alzheimer's is a word that everyone knows and recognizes, people are not aware just generally how this disease manifests. And I've, from my experience, I have always felt that I had to kind of put my mother, hide my mom in a corner, couldn't take her into a restaurant. We were always afraid of her acting out. Taking her grocery shopping was always nerve wracking for my dad, and just he preferred to just leave her at home. So, how do we integrate them into society? How can we make it a more dementia friendly society where, when we do see somebody not acting, in a normal way, instead of all of us stopping and staring, what can we do to be more understanding and let them know that it's okay, that there are many others who are like that? And how, for me, I think a lot of it has to do with awareness, right? And the fact that we're talking about this, but also giving the people the courage to bring their loved ones out of the shadows so that they can live a full life, you know, going to a restaurant, taking a
Mm-hmm.
walk in the neighborhood. I mean, it would start with us talking about it, but also, I mean, there are so many layers, right? I mean, how do we create communities like this that Scandinavia has? I mean, even Japan having a cafe that employs only people with dementia. Maybe it starts in the private sector where you have things like that. But if we could find a way to integrate your mother, my mother, and the millions of Americans who are living with dementia, I think it's 6 million, you know, they wouldn't feel, it wouldn't be such a lonely journey. We
Mm-hmm.
would all be in it together.
I mean, do you have like 5 more minutes? Do you have a hard
Of
out
course,
one?
yeah,
Okay, perfect.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like incarceration, right? In this
Yeah,
country, we like to focus on, young, shiny things, people, who look beautiful in their 20s, and sort of hide away the elements that are deviant, that are
correct.
other, that are strange, that are make you uncomfortable. I mean, it does, you know, people say to me, well, what stage is your mother at, or what's she like, blah blah blah, and I say, if you saw her on the street, you'd probably say there's somebody who can have about a 90-second conversation with you that seems normal, and after that 90 seconds, you're going to be like, something is very wrong with this person, right? And uh, that's where she's at, and everybody knows that. Everybody knows when you see those old people, but nobody continues to sort of talk to them except
Correct.
the few angels that walk amongst them,
That's right.
us. And but it is such a, I mean, I really think it's the great question of our age as the boomers get older and older. How will we handle this? And how will all the children who are around your age and my age, how are we going to move through this last phase of our parents' lives? And also take care of our kids and also, do things professionally. I mean, speak to me a little bit more about your kids and the sandwiching of that. And I mean, because you're so far, I'm assuming they don't see her anymore in that same way.
One of the best, the best advice I received about how I can expose my children to my mother and the disease was from a fellow board member at the Alzheimer's Association. He had overheard me talking about going to California, my most recent trip, and I was grappling with, well, what do I do with my kids? My father's a little older. Do I drop them off at my brother's house when I go see my mother? Because I definitely don't want my eldest daughter, who's bright and always engaged and sees and hears everything, don't want her there. My little guy who's 5, he can come, but I was more concerned about my daughter. And he looked at me and said, no, 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 no. I'm going to send you a few books. Read it to your children. You need to take your children to see your mother. I said, what? But they're going to get frightened by her behavior. They're going to have horrible memories of their grandmother. I don't think that's a great idea. And he said, just read these children's books, prepare them. You won't regret this. And I said, fine. We went to California. 3 days later, after we arrived, I had the courage. I worked up the courage, took my kids with me and my father. And I had a talk with the children. I said, listen, we're going to go see grandma. She's going to be laying, She's not sleeping. You're allowed to touch her. If she yells, don't get scared. I took my daughter with me. She was so excited to see grandma, 할머니 in Korean. And it was incredible. My daughter, the first thing she did, and I have photos of this, as soon as she walked into the room, my mother's feet were peeking out of the covers. She walked straight up to the bed and she made the bed and tucked my mother's feet into the covers. She stood over my mother, tried to talk to her, kissed her on the face, asked me if she can kiss grandma. And she just enjoyed seeing my mom. And I didn't talk about it until that evening when I saw my brother. And my brother said to Charlotte, hey, Charlotte, you saw grandma today? Yeah. Well, how does she look? Great. How was the visit? Good. It was so normal to her. It was almost as if she had no expectations. And she loved being with grandma. So the moral of the story was, we see things the way we see things as adults. We have so much information and we have all these concerns for our children. We want to protect them. But for my daughter, she saw it totally differently. It was her grandmother lying in bed. Sure, she looked different from the last time she saw her, but she just wanted to hug grandma and hold her hand and make sure she was comfortable. And it was a great visit.
Yeah.
Not traumatizing like I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is incredible. I mean, kids are, they are the most empathetic, right, and resilient.
Absolutely.
And will surprise you. I mean, the one who's saying, I need to have these gel nails, Mom, give me $80, will suddenly surprise you.
Gel nails. Wow, that's pricey.
I mean, well, you got to wait. Once you're in the 13, 14 level, there's all sorts of different demands now. But, I mean, I also got a book for my son. I'll research what it is, and we can put it in the show notes, that, was a grandma who, was very loving. And then the middle of the book is she's acting sort of weird. Like she's spilling the eggs on the floor from your plate, and she's not really stable, and she's, on her feet and blah, blah, blah. And then, this diagnosis is revealed. And he really liked it also. He was like, oh, is this what's happening with grandma? And I was like, yeah, it is. This is what's happening. And I mean, I do think that the silver lining for you seems to be that your family, your nuclear family, and your own family in Atlanta, both nuclear families, I guess,
yes,
say, the one you were born into and the one you created, have gotten stronger from this.
Yes. But Vanessa, I won't gloss over the fact that it was also we had some very difficult moments, right? And I have a very supportive husband who's in medicine. So I'm lucky to have had him to rely on when there were medical complications. But I mean, the stress of dealing with all of this and the legal paperwork that you have to get done and to ensure that when she does pass away, everything is in order, and decisions are not made, under emotional duress, right? So all of that was there. I think the middle part, which what you're going through, was the most difficult. The transition from the middle to the advanced stages of Alzheimer's was very difficult. From assisted living to nursing home, that transition was very difficult. From home to assisted living transition, that was very difficult. I was emotional when I was on vacation in Europe. I had all these feelings of guilt that I caused, back to the medical complication where my mother took the FDA-approved medication to help with her aggression. I approved that. And my mother had the complication, and I blamed myself for so long. And I said, I nearly killed my mother. And, my husband was like, you're crazy. That's not, you can't blame yourself for that. You were just trying to make the best medical decision you can. Yeah. And so just this, but, they're stressful conversations. They're emotionally charged conversations. The children feel that, right? And I'm sure, I'm sure it's very difficult for you. And I'm sure you're up at night thinking about, well, what happens next when my mom advances, right? Because there's so many resources that you will need if she needs round-the-clock care. When will you, if you ever do transition her to a nursing home, even that is complex. All the nursing homes you have to look at, the payment, getting, Medicaid and Medicare. There's just so many layers to this that we have to deal with. But right now I think we're more in cruise control, thankfully, but it's a journey.
It's definitely a journey. But how do we change this for the next generation how do we help our children take care of us?
Get a cure for Alzheimer's. I'm confident, Vanessa, that we will have medications, treatment that will either stop it in its tracks, however far along you are in the disease, soon. And then, of course, a cure, But for us, I've already started my husband and I have already started talking about it. I've even started writing journals to my children, just letters. You never know what's going to happen in life, right? But also, I don't want them to have the burden of what I had to deal with. My parents didn't know better as immigrants, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm more than happy to have done all the legal paperwork with my brother for them. The trusts and making sure that their properties don't go into probate and getting a power of attorney and taking care of all their bills and making sure their home and everything is taken care of. I will make sure, we are making sure currently, that my children don't have any of this legal burden to deal with if anything ever happens to us. That's just one checkbox that they won't have to check off for us.
What do you do in terms of your health? Do you take anything preventative? Do you, there's a lot of talk now, right, about also estrogen as being potentially protective against the progression of Alzheimer's in a menopause stage. Like, where are you with all of that?
I'm very committed to my health because of Alzheimer's in my family, right? I take creatine, I work out, I hate working out. I'm not an athlete, but I'm at the gym 4 to 5 times a week. I despise cardio. I'm doing lots of cardio, but mostly it's a lot of weightlifting, which is, very good for our age group. I eat extremely clean. I eat very healthy. I BPA free. I'm kind of a extreme with that. So I want to be able to control what I can control. And if that means changing my lifestyle and being very conscious about what I put in my body, there's a lot of studies about cognition and improving cognition, being in the sauna, steam room, taking creatine.
That part is fun. The sauna and the steam room are fun.
Oh, I can't stand it. You like it? Oh, I feel like I'm suffocating in there. Really? Oh.
Yeah, that's the only part of the gym I like. I would just go straight to the sauna and just forget the rest of the gym. But yeah,
what do you do? Do you do anything preventative
I do a lot of yoga? So yoga
that's
calms you down. I try to walk as much as I possibly can.
Same here.
I'm thinking about lifting weights and all of that. I'm starting to think about that, and I'm very curious about what they'll learn about estrogen and if maybe there is something going on in terms of that. If 2 times the number of Alzheimer's patients are female to male, then there is something going on gender-wise that is worth looking into, so if they could figure that out. I mean, I was very disappointed by the class of drugs that, were just released where they've had a bunch of problems. We don't have to, now we're going to really dovetail off. But I was hoping there was going to be something that would slow this disease for my mother 2 or 3 years ago. And it seems like that sort of, the class of drugs that was on the cover of the New York Times and people were saying maybe they finally had the big breakthrough doesn't feel like it was
the breakthrough that they claimed it was. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So for now, it really is just about health and putting your affairs in order. And, I would just say before we go, the Alzheimer's Association hotline is an incredible resource. When I was early on in this, I called them a bunch of times. They know exactly what they're talking about. And I think if people out there are really confused and just want some advice on all of these myriad aspects of the disease, that's a wonderful place to start. Amara, thank you so much for coming on So Your Parents Are Old. I appreciate you being so open and talking to me about, all of the vicissitudes of what has been a life-changing experience, I think, for both of us.
It sure has. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for having this conversation. And please, to your listeners, if you're going through what Vanessa and I are going through, you are not alone.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the reason we're doing this podcast, so that we can create some community. Even if you feel isolated, you're not alone. Thanks again.
Thank you.